What hope for the peace talks? Ukraine is calling for a ceasefire. The world waits for Russia's next move. Talks will continue, but the Ukrainians have described the first round as difficult. After a fifth day of heavy fighting, President Zelensky made this appeal to Russian soldiers.
Не верьте вашим командирам.
Don't trust your commanders. Don't trust your propaganda. Just save your lives. Leave.
Уходите.
Ukraine's second city has been under sustained attack, with reports of many civilian casualties.
There's plenty of evidence of the ferocity of the battle for Kharkiv. This destroyed tank tells you all you need to know.
Russia feels the economic consequences of its actions as the ruble falls to an all-time low. Good evening. Negotiations between Ukraine and Russia ended without a breakthrough tonight, as fierce fighting continues on the fifth day of Russia's invasion. Officials from both sides met on the Belarus border, with Ukraine calling for a ceasefire and withdrawal of troops. They've agreed to meet for a second round of talks. It came as Ukrainian forces appear to have held off Russian attempts to enter the capital, Kyiv. But the city of Kharkiv has come under intense bombardment, with reports of dozens of civilian deaths. More from there in a moment. First, here's our Europe editor, James Mates.
No one is very optimistic, but this is the best hope there is. Helicopters fly a delegation of Ukrainian negotiators to an undisclosed location on the country's border with Belarus for talks with the Russians. The good news, as they started their work this morning, there are no preconditions. No demands that must be met before the talking can begin. The bad? For any deal acceptable to the Ukrainians, the Russians would have to perform a climb down of historic proportions. Ukraine's President Zelensky has approved talks with Moscow, while at the same time today signing a formal application to join the EU.
Ще раз.
When he spoke, it was to address Russian soldiers directly.
Оккупантів.
4,500 Russian invaders have already been killed, he said. Leave your weapons behind and go. Don't trust your commanders. Don't trust their propaganda. Just save your own lives and leave.
Уходите.
Some of those soldiers saw firsthand how unwelcome they are. They'd been told they were coming as liberators, but in the newly captured southern town of Berdyansk, they faced a crowd shouting, "Damoy, go home." Before long, they retreated from the town centre to cries of "Berdyansk is Ukraine." In Kiev, the electronic road signs have been rewritten to address directly any Russian soldier who makes it into the city. Putin has lost. The entire world is with Ukraine, this one says. Then, how will you be able to look your children in the eye? The city's mayor says the defenders, on the other hand, are tired but resilient.
I just talked to President. Everybody feeling not so well. We're impressed, but not depressed.
The contrast with Moscow is dramatic, as Vladimir Putin sat once again in splendid and fearful isolation from his own ministers, blaming the coming economic collapse on anyone but himself.
We are talking here about the sanctions that the so-called Western community, the empire of lies, as they call it, are trying to impose on our country.
For Kiev, the day the peace negotiators have been talking has been relatively quiet. Tonight, less so. Explosions once again lighting up the night sky in the suburbs around the city.
As the talks took place today, Russia continued its attempts to attack major cities from several fronts. Troops are coming in from Belarus in the north down towards Kyiv. Also up from the south from occupied Crimea. There have been small advances too for those heading east through the separatist-controlled areas of Donetsk. And there's been intense fighting overnight and this morning in and around Kharkiv. There are reports of many civilians killed there. Our correspondent Dan Rivers sent this report from the city.
In Kharkiv today, there was no sanctuary from Putin's war. This was a residential area being hit by what appeared to be cluster bombs. Here, a shopping centre is bombarded, underlining how dangerous it is to even try and buy provisions these days in Kharkiv. Afterwards, you can see how apartments have been peeled apart by indiscriminate bombing. Potentially, this is a war crime happening in Europe, right before our eyes. Today, we drove into the city past columns of Ukrainian militia sent to reinforce the regular troops. We found Ukrainian soldiers holding the southern half of the city have begun to dig in for a long fight. At this checkpoint, a British-supplied NLAW anti-tank weapon.
The soldiers here are very tense. There's planes and helicopters that have been heard overhead, and they're preparing now to fire on them if they are attacked here.
Suddenly, we're told to find cover. Airstrikes are an ever-present threat here. The commander tells me they're being shelled for 17 hours a day.
Our vehicles are ready to respond to any attack from Russian Federation. There is currently a warning about Russian helicopters and aircraft in this area.
Nearby, we see how war is already robbing people of their most basic needs. As I try to talk to people outside this pharmacy, there is a reminder artillery can hit at any time.
What are you queuing for?
What is your message to Vladimir Putin?
Putin, get your troops out of here so everything will end in peace.
But these streets are littered with the debris of a war that's only just begun. There's plenty of evidence of the ferocity of the battle for Kharkiv. This destroyed tank tells you all you need to know. For now, the Ukrainians are still holding this city. But for how much longer?